They say a wedding is the happiest day of your life. For most people, it probably is. For me, it was the most calculated move of my entire existence. I stood under a golden canopy, its silk lining swaying gently in the warm spring breeze. Guests filled the garden pavilion, industry leaders, celebrities, distant relatives I hadn't seen since childhood, all dressed in their best, buzzing with polite curiosity about the bride and groom. The bride was late. I checked my cufflinks, custom platinum, her gift, and nodded once to the wedding planner who was nervously pacing behind a column of white orchids. My best man, Ryan, leaned in and whispered, "She'll come, John, don't flinch." I didn't. But that's when Sophia's father walked toward me, alone. Mr. Caldwell, once a towering business mogul, now a shell of tension in a navy suit, had eyes like cracked glass and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He didn't smile, didn't congratulate me, he just handed me a small black USB. "Watch this before you say I do," he muttered. Then he turned and walked away without another word. I didn't ask questions. I walked out of the aisle, slipped into the back office of the venue, and plugged the USB into the nearest laptop. The screen flickered to life, my heart stopped. There she was, Sophia, in the exact same bridal robe I'd gifted her weeks ago. She was sitting across from a man I instantly recognized, Lance Rowe, her ex, her past she'd never returned to. They were laughing in some private hotel suite, sharing drinks, making promises she'd once made to me. Then came the worst part. Her voice. "He's perfect on paper, Lance, but I don't feel anything when I kiss him. I want passion. I want us." My jaw tightened. Lance leaned in and said, "So you'll marry him, take the foundation trust, and we'll disappear?" Sophia giggled. "Exactly." No need to hear more. I returned the USB to my pocket, walked back toward the altar, and waited. When the music began and the crowd rose, everyone turned to admire Sophia in her custom-designed dress. She looked stunning, flawless makeup, a bouquet of lilies, a smile rehearsed to perfection. But as she passed the first row, halfway down the aisle, I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. Instead, I handed her the USB. Her smile faltered as I leaned in and whispered, "Give this to your bridesmaids. They'll enjoy watching what you really did last Friday night." Her face was drained of color, confusion, panic, denial, all flashed in her eyes, but I didn't wait for her to react. I turned around, buttoned my coat, and walked away. Gasps erupted behind me. Her mother called out, the violinist faltered, someone dropped a glass. But I kept walking, straight down the aisle, past rows of stunned faces, past cameras and whispers and reporters. Ryan met me at the entrance. He didn't speak, he just opened the car door. I got in without looking back. That was the beginning of the end, for her. Because I wasn't just walking out of a wedding. I was stepping into the opening move of a war I had already won. John was not the kind of man who entered a room to be seen. He entered it to be remembered. 32 years old, calm as glass, and sharper than the blade that would one day be held to his back, he had built everything he owned with his bare hands and unreadable expression. In tech circles, they called him the Silent Lion. Not because he roared, but because he didn't need to. He moved with intent, spoke only when he had to, and never lost his cool, even when the stakes were life-altering. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 cleaning jobs to keep food on the table, John learned early that words meant little without the infrastructure to back them up. So he built that infrastructure, first with code, then with companies, then with power. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't charming, but he was unstoppable. 3 years ago, when John met Sophia at a cross-industry venture panel, she was the exact opposite of his world. Sophia was elegance sculpted into human form. 28. Educated abroad, daughter of Harold Caldwell, the same Caldwell who sat on the board of 7 Fortune 500s and had once casually bought a failing airline just to get better access to his vineyard. Sophia was used to being followed by cameras, courted by heirs, and whispered about at every gallery she hosted. But on that stage, she noticed John because he didn't notice her. He answered the moderator's question with calm precision, corrected one investor's theory with quiet data, and made 3 of the firm's highest-level partners nod in agreement. No bravado, no hunger for applause, just control. That night, she sent him a bottle of vintage champagne and a handwritten note that said, "If you ever want a partner in image, let's talk." John didn't believe in image, but he believed in leverage. A woman like Sophia, at his side, could help him navigate the crusty echelons of old wealth far quicker than bootstrapping alone. And perhaps, somewhere under the socialite polish, there was a real person. They started dating, or rather, merging. For Sophia, John was her ticket to stability, not just financial, reputational. She was beautiful, yes, but she'd never been taken seriously in business despite having a degree in behavioral economics. With John, she could finally be viewed as more than a boardroom accessory, and to her credit, she played her part well, poised, articulate, never out of line. She even memorized his investor pitch deck when they traveled together to Davos. She made people smile at him in a way he never could on his own. But John never told her he loved her, because he didn't know what love meant in a world where people made partnerships like mergers. He admired her. He respected her strategy. That, in his world, was enough. What he didn't know was that behind that practiced perfection, Sophia had been juggling two lives. Her other life was hidden in dimly lit apartments, secret burner phones, and whispered laughter shared in the arms of a man named Lance Monroe. Lance was everything John wasn't: a struggling actor, reckless, dangerous, the kind of man who wrote poetry in ketchup on diner napkins and read Sylvia Plath with a cigarette in hand, a man who called her goddess and asked for money without shame. To Sophia, John was the stage. But Lance was the performance. And she thought she was smart enough to handle both. What she didn't account for was her father. Harold Caldwell had spent 4 decades building his empire, burying scandals, silencing press, and curating a last name that opened doors without knocking. He'd seen hundreds of women like his daughter, charming, reckless, always believing they could rewrite consequences with a smile. But Harold was old now, and tired, and watching his daughter attempt to con a man like John wasn't just disappointing, it was humiliating. He didn't confront her. He just started collecting. He hired a private investigator, he traced bank wires, he followed the weekend escapes, and when Sophia told him proudly that she was marrying John in May, he simply nodded and burned the footage to a USB. Deborah, meanwhile, had always been in the background. She wasn't from high society, she wasn't glamorous, she was John's operations manager from the very beginning, back when his office was a borrowed desk and his coffee came from a shared pot. Deborah was the kind of woman who remembered deadlines without looking at the calendar, the kind who fixed broken launch codes at 3 a.m. without bragging about it the next day. She was soft-spoken, not shy, but purposeful. And she'd loved John for years, quietly, without a name for it. But she never stepped forward, never tried to compete with someone like Sophia, because John seemed content. And Deborah knew that people like him didn't make decisions based on affection, they made decisions based on alignment, logic, efficiency. Still, on the day he told her he was getting married, Deborah had paused only a second before saying, "Do you want me to draw up the prenup, or will Sophia's lawyers handle it?" He'd blinked once, impressed. "Yours will be better." She smiled, nodded, and began. Ryan, John's best friend and former co-founder, had always been skeptical of Sophia. Where John was methodical, Ryan was instinctual. He'd grown up with John, fought beside him in business wars, and seen him crushed during a failed acquisition in Berlin. Ryan knew when something didn't fit. And Sophia never fit. "She performs too much," Ryan had once said. "The way she laughs. Like she wants the echo to last longer than the joke." John didn't argue, he never did, but he remembered. Still, despite every warning, he let the engagement unfold. Maybe because it looked right, maybe because his board approved. Maybe because he thought it was finally time to play the game their way. But now, standing at that altar, after Sophia's father had handed him a plastic device heavy with betrayal, all the faces of the past lined up in John's memory: Ryan's quiet doubts, Deborah's steady presence, Sophia's performative charm. And for the first time in years, John didn't care about alignment. He cared about truth, and truth was finally, violently, on his side. The first crack appeared 6 weeks before the wedding. John remembered it clearly, not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. Sophia had always announced her exits, even her silences, but that night, she left a dinner party early without saying goodbye. A simple emergency call, followed by a rushed kiss on the cheek and the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. The next day, she claimed she'd gone to meet an investor in Venice, but her boarding pass showed Lisbon. Ryan noticed first. He'd been working closely with John to finalize the pre-IPO architecture for their second firm, a spin-off meant to innovate in AI-driven energy analytics. Ryan had learned long ago never to pry into John's personal life, but as best man and lifelong friend, he had a radar for instability. "She's moving strangely," Ryan said one night, tossing a report on the glass table. "Different pattern, new contacts, that's not wedding jitters." John didn't respond. He was already ahead. He had installed a passive digital trace on Sophia's cloud permissions, not a hack, just permissions she'd once signed blindly in their joint planning app, which included synced location pings and encrypted file backups. In the first 2 years of their relationship, Sophia's digital trail read like a polished itinerary: spa, charity, exhibition, brunch, gym, repeat. But lately, anomalies popped up like static: a deleted WhatsApp thread here, a cash withdrawal at a location she never frequented, a series of late-night calls routed through a secondary SIM card. It wasn't the cheating that stung first. It was the logistics. John didn't believe in confrontation, not immediately. He believed in timing. Evidence, pattern matching. He let her spiral in silence. Sophia, on the other hand, had started a slow campaign: subtle comments to shared friends, little sighs in the presence of mutual investors, the occasional statement like, "John's mind is brilliant, but sometimes I wish he'd let himself feel things." At first, no one noticed, but repetition had a way of becoming truth. She painted him as emotionally distant, power-obsessed, borderline robotic, and the world ate it up. What Sophia didn't know was that her father, Harold Caldwell, had been listening from the very beginning. Late one night, 3 weeks before the wedding, Harold had passed by Sophia's study and overheard her speaking in a tone no father should ever hear from his daughter. She was laughing, mocking John. "He's practically designed to be used," she'd said over speakerphone. "He doesn't even realize I stopped loving him months ago. I'll marry him, give it a year, divorce with a golden clause, and coast the rest of my life." The voice on the other end asked, "You're sure the prenup won't stop that?" She giggled. "He thinks it's airtight, but there's a secondary clause in California family law: intent to separate before marriage can be grounds for relitigation. Ryan told me that once, ironically." John would later repeat those words in a whisper, burned into his memory. "He thinks I'm his trophy." He didn't get angry. He just pressed record. By the 4th week, John had gathered enough to build a timeline. Sophia had wired money to a private account twice, once for a gallery installation and once for hotel expenses that didn't match any known trips. She had deleted an email thread titled Monaco, Risk Containment Strategy, where she had CC'd herself using a private alias, an email John had traced to a burner laptop. And yet, she kept smiling in public, kept posting pre-wedding photo shoots, kept letting the world believe that she and John were the golden couple. Deborah saw it too. She didn't say much, but one evening as she handed John the quarterly litigation summary, she added, "If you ever want me to ghostwrite your vows, let me know. I'm good at writing things that sound sincere." John looked up. That was all she said, but he understood, she knew, and unlike Sophia, Deborah didn't play games. It was around that time Sophia made a fatal mistake. She added Ryan's girlfriend to a group chat labeled Bali Bachelorettes. She invited 5 women to a secret party under the guise of pre-honeymoon detox and posted stories from a private villa. Ryan's girlfriend, savvy with screenshots and suspicious of Sophia's flirtatious history, sent John a screen cap that changed everything. In it, Sophia was leaning over a man who wasn't John. The man's face wasn't visible, but his tattoo was. A snake curling around a wine glass. John didn't need facial recognition. The man's name was Brendan, a bartender turned startup failure who had once pitched John at a conference, then ghosted the partnership. Brendan was now Sophia's secret, and she had left a trail thick enough to follow with a blindfold on. Still, John didn't confront her. Instead, he began shifting assets, not rapidly, slowly, stealthily. The joint foundation Sophia was expecting to co-own after the wedding, frozen. The apartment deed, re-registered under his holding company. The prenup she thought could be unraveled, reaffirmed via court-stamped amendment, with Ryan and Deborah both listed as legal witnesses. Every step was a stitch in a trap. Even Harold Caldwell, worn by disappointment, began cooperating. He emailed John privately. "I raised her wrong, but I won't let her ruin you, not when you're the only man I've ever respected in this entire room of suits." John's response was simple: "Bring the USB to the wedding." The wedding invitations had already been sent, the dress custom fitted. Sophia was now committed, publicly, reputationally, socially. She couldn't back out without risking exposure. That was what made it perfect. By the 6th week, everything was in place. The lawyer had prepped press release drafts, one for success, one for scandal. Deborah had preloaded the documents onto a secured backup. Ryan had arranged a silent photographer inside the church, disguised as part of the floral team, ready to capture every second. And John, he simply waited. No warning, no suspicion, just the cold, sharp edge of justice tightening around Sophia's throat with every second she kept pretending. John didn't cry, he didn't throw a glass against the wall or scream into his pillow. Instead, he opened a blank spreadsheet and began categorizing every act of betrayal like it was a quarterly audit. Timestamps of her disappearances. Screen recordings of her social media activity patterns. Duplicated banking logs that showed two $5,000 wire transfers to a dummy holding company traced back to a bar owner in Portugal. Phone call durations, delivery receipts, metadata. Each entry had a label, a source, a folder. But the one variable John couldn't quantify, the one that wouldn't fit into a neat cell on his spreadsheet, was the sickening ache that still settled behind his ribs every time he remembered the sound of Sophia's laugh. He couldn't understand why, even now, he didn't want to destroy her completely. He wanted her to suffer, to regret, to understand what she'd lost, but he didn't want her ruined. That was the most humiliating realization of all. The man she had betrayed was still the man who wanted closure instead of chaos. That was his flaw, his weakness. Ryan noticed. They met for drinks once a week, just the two of them, same bar they'd visited since their second startup failed back in 2018. Back then, they'd drowned in shame and vodka. Now, Ryan drank wine, and John just sat with a glass of water and his silence. "You're not trying to win anymore," Ryan said one evening, leaning back, watching the city lights flicker behind the window. "I'm not. You want her to understand, that's different." John looked down at his untouched drink. "She built a performance so perfect," he said quietly. "She almost had me convinced it was real." Meanwhile, Sophia was floating through fittings, flower arrangements, and influencer collaborations with curated serenity. She posted a pre-wedding skincare routine on Instagram that got 500,000 views in 24 hours. John watched it on mute, studied her movements. It wasn't her smile that disturbed him, it was how practiced it had become. Harold Caldwell had gone silent since the USB handoff, but one night, just after 2 a.m. John's phone buzzed. Private number. "John," Caldwell said. "I can't stop her." "I know. But you can." There was no emotion in his voice, just the heavy exhale of a father who had watched his daughter become unrecognizable. John didn't respond right away. Instead, he watched the security feed of Sophia's penthouse entryway, footage he had access to through the building's shared cloud. That same night, she entered with a new overnight bag, one not registered to any designer she favored. She wasn't alone. The man, thin, wiry, maybe mid-30s, kept his head down, but John recognized the body language, the hesitation, the comfort. She wasn't even being careful anymore. He wanted to look away, to close the feed, but he didn't. Instead, he clicked record. The next day, Sophia bought a $12,000 bridal necklace, pear-cut diamonds in a sunburst setting. She posted a photo holding the velvet box with the caption, "A promise to myself, a future I chose." John stared at it for a while, then closed the app. He still hadn't told Deborah. She noticed, of course, she always noticed. At a planning meeting 2 weeks before the wedding, she placed a folder in front of him marked, "Alternate Exit Strategy, D.C Model." "Just in case," she said. He looked up at her. "Have I changed?" he asked. Deborah didn't flinch. "Not yet." John closed the folder and whispered, "I almost wish she were a stranger. That way I wouldn't care so much about what she thought of me." "You care?" Deborah asked. "No, I care that I still care." That was the difference. Betrayal, he realized, wasn't like a gunshot, it was a long, slow leak, and sometimes, the wound was self-inflicted. He had let her in, let her decorate the halls of his life with her illusions. He had let her create the fantasy, and even now, part of him missed it. It made him ashamed, but he never let it show. Instead, he planned. He had 2 separate proposals written, one for the IPO, one for the public takedown. The lawyers were briefed under code names. The exit clauses in their private contracts were signed under digital keys only he could access. He hired a private investigator, not to find new dirt, but to validate what he already had: redundancy, clean trails, precaution. He met with his mother one quiet evening in the outskirts of town. She still lived in the same cottage where he'd grown up. He didn't say much about Sophia, just told her to skip the wedding. She looked at him for a long time. "I taught you how to fight," she said. "I didn't teach you how to forgive." He nodded. "You taught me to survive, that's enough." Back in the city, Sophia was filming her wedding dress reveal with a camera crew and a bottle of fake champagne. John watched from the control room, live feed. The owner of the production house owed him a favor. He studied how she twirled in the mirror, how she smiled, how she pretended to be the happiest woman alive. And for a second, he almost believed she was. But then she took a call, stepped aside, whispered something too soft for the mic to catch. He read her lips. "Keep it hidden, he can't know." John exhaled slowly. The dress didn't matter. The vows didn't matter. The future didn't matter. Only the moment when she realized it was over, that was the moment he was designing. He didn't want revenge, not exactly, he wanted impact. He wanted to puncture her illusion so precisely that it shattered from within. So he studied her. Like a final exam he knew he'd already passed. 2 nights before the wedding, Sophia received a letter on thick ivory paper. No envelope, no return address. Inside, in her father's precise handwriting, were only 2 lines. "Don't think your lies are invisible. He knows. I helped him." The pen stopped mid-sentence. The air in her penthouse seemed to freeze. Sophia reread the words 5 times, then she crumpled the page and threw it into the fireplace. She didn't dare call her father. That would be an admission of guilt. Instead, she spent the next 2 hours replaying every lie, every whisper, every secret message, trying to map out what he could possibly know, and how much John had found out. She didn't panic openly, that wasn't her style, but the next morning, she cancelled her final gown fitting, skipped her Pilates session, and called her backup attorney in private. Her tone was flat. "If he pulls out on the prenup, are we still covered?" The attorney hesitated. "Only if he hasn't moved the assets." She didn't like that answer. Meanwhile, John kept playing his role. He sent Sophia flowers at the rehearsal venue, a soft bouquet of peonies and hydrangeas with a handwritten note. 2 more days, can't wait to see you in white." She stared at the note like it might explode. Because she didn't know what was real anymore. What Sophia hadn't realized was that John had already moved 80% of his liquid net worth into offshore generational trusts months earlier. Irrevocable, legally distant. The prenup she'd once believed she could fracture through emotional manipulation and loophole clauses, now utterly hollow. Even if she followed through with her whispered plan to divorce after 12 months, she'd walk away with a fraction of what she thought. And that was assuming John didn't counter with a breach of faith suit, which, given the data he now had, would be impossible to dodge. But her problems didn't end with legal assets. One of her biggest secrets had already escaped her grasp. Brendan, the man she'd entertained behind closed hotel doors, wasn't loyal, not even close. During one of their more reckless rendezvous, she'd allowed him to record their conversation on his phone. She thought it was foreplay, he thought it was insurance. When Brendan ran into financial trouble, he sold everything, every whispered threat, every mocking joke about John's cluelessness, every plan for siphoning resources, to a mid-tier gossip tabloid hungry for a scandal. By the time the editors realized what they had, they couldn't believe it, a full exposé, complete with audio, timestamps, and photos of Sophia in a silk robe that looked very much like a bridal gift. The story was scheduled to drop, automatically, at 3 p.m., the day of the wedding. John knew. He'd purchased the story's timed release himself. But he didn't cancel the ceremony. He didn't change the guest list, didn't reschedule the venue, didn't warn anyone. He let Sophia believe everything was still intact. Because the most powerful destruction wasn't about removing someone's crown, it was about letting them walk to the throne, and fall from it themselves. On the day of the wedding, John woke up at 5 a.m. He did eyed his usual run, ate a light breakfast, read a book while sipping tea. By 9, he was dressed in white, crisp, fitted, unblemished. A minimalist pocket square. Watch aligned, shoes polished. He looked calm. Not joyful, not nervous. Just calm. Ryan met him outside the hotel ballroom before the car arrived. "Sure you're ready?" he asked. John checked his cufflink. "This isn't the ceremony, it's the conclusion." Sophia was already at the venue, hours ahead. She was walking through floral arrangements, correcting petal placements, pretending to care about centerpieces when all she could think about was whether her father had meant what he wrote. She didn't sleep the night before, her hands shook when she touched her necklace, her phone battery drained from compulsive checking. Still, she smiled for the camera crew. Still, she posted a story, "Today, I become Mrs. John Whitlock." In another timeline, maybe she would have been, but here, she was seconds from collapse. The guests arrived. Cameras clicked, journalists took their places under disguised aliases, everyone buzzed with anticipation. They expected glamour, elegance, a merger of two legacies. John gave them all of that, and something more. As the music began and guests rose, Sophia took her first steps down the aisle. The string quartet played something elegant and tragic. She moved slowly, deliberately, veil flowing, her eyes fixed on John. But she wasn't smiling. She was scanning him, looking for clues. Would he flinch? Would he blink? Would he say, "I do"? He did none of those things. When she reached the halfway point, John stepped forward. Again, not fast, not dramatic, just a few measured steps forward. She stopped. He reached into his coat pocket. Her hands twitched. But instead of pulling out a ring or a vow scroll, he handed her a small, clear plastic envelope. Inside it was a single card, a USB. Sophia's eyes darted down, then back to his face. His voice didn't carry, it didn't need to. He leaned forward and whispered, "Give this to your bridesmaids, they'll enjoy watching what you really did last Friday night." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. John stepped back, and turned around. He didn't run, didn't shout. He walked calmly, purposefully, down the aisle he was never meant to complete. Behind him, a wave of confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. By the time Sophia turned back toward the altar, John was already outside the hall, and the notification had gone live. Across the city, millions of phones lit up with one headline. "Betrayal at the altar, heiress Sophia Caldwell exposed in explosive affair scandal, groom walks out mid-ceremony." She never saw it coming. But he had been planning it all along. The ceremony was set for 4 o'clock. By 3:30, the venue buzzed with the kind of energy that only the rich and oblivious carried, chatter about signature cocktails, bets on which influencer would cry first, and compliments on the lavender floral arrangements that lined the gold-trimmed aisle. The string quartet rehearsed quietly in the corner. The photographers had memorized their positions. Everything was flawless. The groom's seat was empty, but no one noticed. By 3:58, John stood at the front of the aisle, dressed in pure white, not a single thread out of place. His jaw was set, his expression neutral. Not blank, just unreadable. The guests rose to their feet as the first notes of the processional began. Sophia appeared at the entrance, radiant, perfect, exactly as the cameras demanded. Her diamond veil caught the sunlight like stardust, and her slow smile convinced even the skeptics that this was love. She stepped forward. She walked slowly, carefully. What she didn't see were the two subtle figures standing at the edges of the aisle, John's legal counsel and a discreet tabloid contact, both holding phones, both waiting. John waited until she reached the halfway point, then he stepped forward, no smile, no outstretched hand. Sophia faltered slightly but kept walking, her heart thumped hard against her ribs. He stopped in front of her, just a foot away. No words yet, he simply extended a small, unmarked envelope. Her eyes narrowed, but her fingers took it anyway. Then, John leaned forward, so close that only she could hear, and whispered, "Give this to your maid of honor, she'll know how to press play." Her fingers clenched the envelope. The string quartet continued playing, unaware. Guests craned their necks, but John didn't move back to the altar. He turned to the priest. The elderly man gave a polite smile. "Shall we begin?" John said nothing. Instead, he turned toward the crowd, friends, CEOs, distant relatives, brand sponsors, and 2 reporters in disguise. "I'm sorry for wasting your time," he said, voice steady. "The bride has something she needs to confess." The air cracked. Murmurs erupted instantly. Sophia froze, her entire body flushed cold. The maid of honor, confused, opened the envelope. Inside, a USB with John's crest engraved on it. She hesitated, looked toward the AV booth. A tech assistant, already briefed, walked over. "No," Sophia snapped suddenly, her voice too loud, too sharp. "Stop!" But the screen behind the altar flickered to life. At first, just audio. Her voice, laughing, flirty. "Of course he doesn't suspect a thing. He still thinks I chose him out of love. Isn't that cute?" A few laughs in the crowd died instantly. Another clip played. "I give it 6 months, maybe a year if I want to time the prenup right. After that, I'm out." Gasps. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. The next audio file wasn't just Sophia, it was Brendan, her lover, speaking to a friend. "I've got everything. Calls, messages, even screen recordings. She thinks she's conning him, but I'm playing both sides. If he finds out, she's done." Then the financial records began to scroll, transfers, payouts, dates that lined up with John's own bank statements. The final slide appeared. Affidavit of witness, Harold Caldwell. A digital signature followed. Sophia couldn't breathe. The priest stepped back. The string quartet had stopped. The crowd was no longer whispering. They were staring, frozen, silent, waiting. Sophia turned to John, trembling. "You don't have to do this, not like this." John raised a brow. "I'm not doing anything." He nodded to the exit. Everything else was already in motion. Sophia took a step forward, but her knees shook. The press release went live at that exact moment. Eve. Rye journalist's phone buzzed simultaneously. A joint statement from Whitlock Holdings and Caldwell Enterprises appeared on screen. In light of material fraud and reputational endangerment, the scheduled union between Mr. John Whitlock and Ms. Sophia Caldwell has been dissolved. We request privacy and decency in handling the matter. Legal proceedings are active. Another notification dropped seconds later. A tabloid headline. CEO groom exposes bride's affair, mid-ceremony, scandal involving prenup fraud and audio leaks. Guests rose from their seats. Some took videos, some simply left, avoiding eye contact. Sophia stood alone at the altar, her breath hitched, lips trembling, but the weight of the room silenced her. She didn't cry, not yet. But she turned and ran. Down the aisle, past the altar, through the open doors. Her veil tore on a chair leg. She didn't stop. Outside, cameras flashed like gunfire. Paparazzi had arrived just in time. Someone shouted her name. She climbed into a black car and slammed the door shut, but the window was down just long enough to catch her tear-streaked face. Back inside, John remained still. He turned to the priest and said quietly, "Thank you for your time." Then walked out the opposite side of the hall. Deborah met him at the car. "You okay?" she asked. He didn't respond. His lawyer slid into the front seat. "Everything's been filed." John nodded. "Press team?" They already submitted follow-ups. Her father approved. He stared out the window as the car pulled away. Behind him, the wedding venue was already being cleared. A reporter tried to chase the car. Deborah raised the tinted divider. John closed his eyes. He didn't smile, he didn't laugh, he didn't gloat. But for the first time in months, he felt something close to clean. Not victorious, just clean. As if the weight of the performance had finally lifted from his chest. He checked his watch, 2:49 p.m. 12 minutes after the ceremony was supposed to begin. He opened his phone, no missed calls, no messages, just one file waiting at the top of his cloud drive. Closure sequence, MP4. He didn't watch it, he just let it sit there. Later, Sophia would claim she was blindsided, that the files were fake, that it was a hack, that John was paranoid. But the world didn't believe her. Not with her own voice echoing across every platform. Not with her father's notarized statement attached. Not with the financial trail so clean it could have been audited by the SEC. And definitely not with the footage of her running from her own wedding, crying into the arms of a man no one could name. The damage was irreversible. Not just to her reputation, but to her illusion, the one she'd spent years crafting. It was gone. And John had walked away, quietly, strategically, without throwing a single stone. The fallout wasn't immediate. It was nuclear. The wedding disaster video hit 12 million views in 24 hours. By the next morning, Sophia Caldwell's name was trending, alongside words like scam bride, groom revenge, and USB of doom. Clips of her frozen at the altar were everywhere, YouTube edits, TikTok parodies, slow-motion Instagram reels. Even late-night comedians picked it up. Sophia tried to post a statement. I was framed, the footage is edited, I was vulnerable, but no one listened. Because by then, the full affair footage had leaked, not just the phone calls, the actual security camera clips of her entering Brendan's condo, multiple times, wearing the same necklace John had gifted her weeks earlier. Brendan, trying to salvage his own reputation, posted a 6-minute clarification video. I didn't know she was engaged when it started, he claimed. But receipts told a different story. Flight logs, hotel invoices, private messages, voice memos where he bragged about screwing over the tech guy and cashing out. Every one of them timed, signed and sealed by John's legal team. Sophia called it harassment. She filed a defamation suit 2 weeks later. The world expected a public court showdown. But John said nothing. No counterclaim, no statement, not even a press conference. He didn't need one, because she lost, quietly, swiftly. Without a single headline announcing her defeat, just a silent court document confirming that the evidence submitted by the defense was factual, authentic, and voluntarily recorded by the plaintiff. Translation: she documented her own downfall. Her father, Mr. Caldwell, resigned from his board seats at 3 public companies. His resignation letter, leaked by a corporate insider, was cold and direct. I do not excuse what my daughter did, but I also cannot bear the weight of it. Her actions are her own. In the same week, all of Sophia's brand deals vanished. Luxury skincare lines pulled her contracts. A streaming network cancelled her upcoming wedding documentary. The only endorsement she retained was a temporary partnership with a bottled water company, who withdrew once her name began trending with fraud. Her social media page, once boasting 5 million curated followers, shrank rapidly. Within 45 days, she lost over 2.7 million. The only comments left were gifs of John walking away in silence. Meanwhile, John didn't post a single word. He just left, disappeared from public view. The next anyone heard of him, he was seen in Zurich, not for vacation, but for work. He'd quietly filed and launched Project Icarus AG, a Swiss-based startup focused on encrypted data infrastructure for emerging governments and humanitarian agencies. 3 of his former investors followed him across borders. So did Deborah. She left her old job the week after the wedding, no announcement, just a short LinkedIn update. New chapter, no regrets. Their first office was small, tucked near Lake Zurich, with bare walls and only one shared espresso machine. But the product was strong. The system John built was surgically precise, just like his exit from Sophia's life. The tech world noticed. Within 2 months, they raised 20 million in funding. By month 3, that valuation crossed $150 million. Sophia tried to spin it. She claimed he'd used her for fame, that he manipulated the press, that he fabricated the affair, but the court records were public now. And no one cared about her narratives anymore, because betrayal wasn't just a personal failure. In her case, it was documented evidence. And John never denied her. He just outgrew her. By the time the anniversary of the wedding that never was came around, Sophia was hosting a live stream where barely 200 people tuned in. In contrast, John was spotted at a cafe in Lucerne, having lunch with tech journalist Elise Fontaine, a notoriously sharp columnist known for her brutal truth pieces. A photo leaked the next day. John wore a grey cashmere coat, one leg crossed over the other, hand resting on a cup of espresso. Calm, relaxed. The caption Elise posted on her article read, "Some men build empires from betrayal." It trended in 5 countries. When asked during a later podcast if she believed John orchestrated the takedown, Elise just laughed. "I think Sophia underestimated who she was playing with," she said. "You don't fake your way through a relationship with someone like John Whitlock. He doesn't raise his voice, he just rewrites the rules." The internet agreed. Even those who had once called John cold now saw his silence as strength. Because he never gloated, never retaliated, never stooped. He let the truth speak. And Sophia? She was left screaming into a void that no longer echoed back. Back in Switzerland, John kept building. No scandal, no interviews, just meetings, strategies, and quiet momentum. He didn't date, didn't post, didn't explain. When Deborah asked him one evening, weeks after the noise died down, why he hadn't released his own statement, he looked at her and simply said, "She built the fire, all I did was stop standing in it." That night, they both stayed late in the office. She didn't pry further, he didn't elaborate, but when he handed her a folder labeled Trust Implementation, Employee Tier 1, Deborah Lang, she understood. It wasn't about revenge, it never was, it was about choosing peace, even if that peace was forged through wreckage. Sophia eventually moved out of the city. Tried rebranding under a new name, started a podcast, sold a dating guide. But no matter what she called herself, people remembered. The internet never forgets. And the clip of John whispering at the altar, followed by the camera flash catching his back as he walked away, remained one of the most shared videos of the year. When a startup founder later asked him in private how he stayed so composed through public betrayal, John gave a rare smile and said, "You don't train for storms when they arrive, you train years before, when no one's watching." By then, he wasn't the man who got left for dead, he was the man who walked out alive, and then quietly built the kind of legacy no scandal could ever touch. They say revenge is best served cold, but that assumes I served anything. I didn't. I stood still and let her actions become her confession. I didn't shout, I didn't shame her at the altar, I gave her a USB, and she chose to slice her own veil, with trembling hands and the spotlight watching. Even now, I don't replay the footage. I don't need to. Because every time I close my eyes, I can still see it. Her expression the moment the truth lit the screen. Shock, shame, denial, collapse. All choreographed by her own words. It's strange what people assume about vengeance. They picture rage. I pictured silence. The kind of silence that doesn't beg to be heard, just sits in the corner and waits. That's what I became. Not her executioner, just her consequence. And when people ask me if I ever miss her, I say, I miss the version of her I imagined, not the one who existed. She told me once, months before the unraveling, that truth is subjective. But it wasn't. Not when her voice said it. Not when her father verified it. Not when every lie unraveled at the most sacred moment she thought she controlled. They say I orchestrated it, I didn't, I documented it. And that distinction matters. Because vengeance wants applause. I never wanted noise, just clarity. Deborah once asked me, days after the fallout, what it felt like to walk away from someone who betrayed you so deeply. I told her, it felt like walking out of a burning building, where the fire kept asking me to come back. Sophia lit her match the moment she chose secrets over sincerity. I just refused to stay long enough to become ashes. Some say I should have warned her. But how do you warn someone who enjoyed lying? How do you protect someone who smiles at your blindness? You don't. You just stop explaining and let them meet themselves. She did. At the altar. In front of 100 people, floral walls, and vows she never intended to keep. And when she ran, I didn't chase. Because some people don't need punishment. They need an audience. And she had one. I just made sure they had the truth. Now, months later, when I walk through Zurich with coffee in hand, strangers nod at me like they know, but they don't. Because the real story never played out on screens. It played out in my restraint. In the nights I didn't retaliate. In the mornings I woke up and chose clarity instead of chaos. Sophia will live her life trying to erase mine from her timeline, but I don't need to erase her. She already did that, one secret at a time. And me, I didn't win, I freed myself, from the illusion, from the performance, from the belief that love without truth could last. They say revenge is best served cold, but I never served it. I handed her the knife, and she carved her downfall in real time, while wearing white. At the altar, I never raised my voice, I just raised the truth, and that was enough.